Great. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Cronin. I'm director of the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation. This is a very, very special event for us. It's a very special event because it's the first time in over 2 years that we're having a live event with before a live audience. It's also a special event because it's the first time, and this is why everybody in the room and online is a guinea pig, because we're trying out our hybrid technology. So there's not just the physical audience here in the room, but there is the online audience around the world that's listening in on the event tonight. Because one of the things we discovered during the pandemic was that there is quite an appetite for and interest in poetry and translation in many parts of the world. And one of the things that the new technology allows us to do is to facilitate people to get access to this. And the third, and I think perhaps the most important aspect of this evening is that we're here to launch an important collection of translations, but then differente, a different Eden Ecopoetry from Ireland and Galicia. I was thinking to some extent of when is the first kind of poetic invocation of Ireland and who does it? And of course, the first kind of summoning of Ireland into being is by Doireann Ní Ghríofa. So what Imogen does is he literally kind of chants the land into being. Me gli mwyd, me ton dílan, me glort mara. I am wind on sea. I am a flooding wave. I am the voice of the ocean. And of course, where is Doireann Ní Ghríofa supposed to have come from? He's a Milesian. He is the account would be that they hailed from the Iberian Peninsula. It is, of course, the sea that is the main channel of communication between the peninsula and Ireland. And of course, one of the things when he did turn up is that he was entrusted with the stewardship of Ireland by Éireann, Banaba and Paula, the three queens of the Tuatha De Danann that give their name to the island of Ireland. And of course, the Tuatha De Danann then went into hiding. They were an invisible presence. So I often think of the Tuatha De Danann. I always think of Éireann, Banaba and Paula waiting there, keeping a watching eye what was happening to this stewardship, and in particular, how we've looked after or failed to look after the environment at various stages in the history of the island. But it's also, I think, a great significance in the fact that we're coming here to celebrate works in and of translation, because one of the things that translators do is they negotiate difference. They deal with the notion of communication across difference. And so when we think about the world that we inhabit, we often talk about the notion of multilingualism and multiculturalism and tend to think of it in terms of different languages, different cultures, and so on. But I think we've also to think about the multicultures of the world that we inhabit, the languages of birds, the languages of plants, the languages of rivers, the languages of mountains, and to what extent poetry acts as a kind or a form of translation or encounter with those different kinds of difference. To what extent is poetry translational, not just between languages, but in terms of translating the multi-speciesness of our world into a language that is in some way intelligible or understandable to us. Talking about species needs, one of my duties is to remind you of the fact that should a fire, in the unlikely event, as they always say, of fire breaking out, and that we have fire exits on the top floor, and you can also exit the way you came in. There's also bathrooms on this floor and up on the second floor. Before I hand you over to Keith Payne, who will be our compere this evening, I want to thank the Cervantes for its very generous support, not just for this event, but for many other events that we've organized here in the center. And we're deeply grateful for the interest that the Institute has showed both in literature, but more especially in translation. So, Keith, without further ado.
Thanks very much, Michael. And I'd like to second that gratitude towards Instituto Cervantes Dublin, our collaborator in this and in the event in Cork we're going down to, and also the centre here we're in, the Trinity Centre for Literary and Cultural Translation. And thank you so much to James and Ethna and Michael for hosting us here. It's a marvelous, magnificent institution and centre. And we've been having a conversation all afternoon, how we can see clearly that translation, the presence of translation, the reality, the existence of it is on the rise. Somewhat like the Doireann translators were, and still are to some extent, invisible, but no, we're coming out from the she, from underground. And Michael was just talking about that, hinting at a delicate balance that we all live in. And I've heard already this year my first cuckoos. It's surprisingly early, frighteningly early. So, and I thought today on the way down here of that delicate balance of that cuckoo, cuckoo, and that trochaic back and forth, and how we have to inhabit that. And of course, it seems so obvious that poetry will be the cadence with which we choose one way of living with those various cultures and species. And so, having heard that cuckoo, and with a title that I think we've all been wanting to hear, I'll open this briefly with a poem called We're Saved. Whether how realistic or not, but at least it's good to hear it. We're saved. We're saved. The end of the world isn't coming at all. The cuckoo sang. In late Aveda, the cuckoo sang. The cuckoo always appears from Limos. And there we were, happily digging away in the mocha. There weren't many folk left. They weren't even here for the sowing, here where because of the scent, when cutting them down, they said, body and soul of the oaks. And I'm also reading that poem. It's a translation from Emilio Araujo, contemporary poet from Ireland and Galicia, on page 71 for those of you who have a copy. Because Emilio translated Pierce Hutchinson. Pierce Hutchinson, around 1950-51, at the time, gay poet, communist, believed Franco's Spain was the place he should go to. And while on the ship berthed in Vigo for a short period, for a couple of hours, because the ship went Southampton, Vigo, Lisbon, and then Lisbon to Buenos Aires, it would bring all the immigrants across. And he was sitting on the boat, whiling away the time, probably having a drink of wine, maybe writing some poems. And he heard Galician musicians strike up. And it was essentially an American wake for the Southern Americas in the Galician account, and for the Northern America for us. And he realized at that moment, and he writes in the introduction to his collected translations, he realized that moment that the idea of una nación bajo el sol, one nation under the sun, was in fact propaganda. And there's a huge variety on that Iberian Peninsula. And so he embraced the languages, the many languages of that peninsula, translated Galician, Catalan, later Genovese, Flemish. He was a masterful poet and translator, wonderful sensibility, both sociologically and spiritually, I think. And so it somehow closed a little bit of a circle to translate and read Emilio's poem that was translated by Pierce here tonight to open this, and to believe somewhat that, yes, we are saved, I think. And so just very briefly, we can talk about it later in the Q&A perhaps, but just A Different Eden really came about from the notion that we had these two languages, two nations on the geographic edge of Europe. Galicia is, as I tell people, the Donegal of Spain. You know, when you say the Northwest, people kind of say Donegal, and they go, okay, exactly where you are. And what we really wanted to achieve with this book, which was a wonderful experience, co-edit with Lorna Shaughnessy and Martin Vega, was to put people, poets from these languages and these nations side by side, and let them hold a conversation about their concerns for the environment from a variety of angles, from the language of ecology and the ecology of language itself, from the rural life and the very sense of not romanticizing that, because if any of you have worked and survived in the country, it's not a romantic place to be. It's very tough. The destruction that we have caused by being here, the animal life, but essentially at the end, a sense of hope. Because while we were preparing this, I listened to a program on the BBC, and in the UK, a number of universities did a study on how best to discuss what language to use to talk about this. Do we even call it an environmental disaster, global warming, an environmental question? And they discovered, as we've all learned with the pandemic, that people can take bad news, but we need a little bit of hope. And with that bit of hope, we'll push on through. And so that was how we decided to round off the anthology. And so tonight we're going to have a couple of poems, both from Nidhi Zak here on my left and Daniel Salgado, who's visited us from Galicia. They'll read their own poems in various languages, and then we'll hear their selections. Nidhi will choose a couple of Galician poems and Daniel a few Irish poems. And then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A from anybody. And please feel free to throw any questions you can come up with in our direction. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Nidhi Zak. Okay, Nidhi Zak Idea Epe, did I do that correctly? Is a poet, pacifist, and a fabulous poet. The recipient of a Next Generation Artist Award in Literature from the Arts Council of Ireland. Nidhi serves on the Expert Advisory Committee of Culture Ireland, as well as the Advisory Board of Diversifying Poetry. Auguries of a Minor God from Faber and Faber 2021, which is a stunning, beautiful book. And I recommend it for many reasons, but primarily today for the musicality of her line and her ability to capture that balance is between line and ring is really exquisite and quite marvelous. Her first collection was Auguries of a Minor God, is currently shortlisted for the John Pollard Foundation International Poetry Prize and has been longlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize. So Nidhi, I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, and thanks for having us here. This is such a beautiful anthology, a trilingual anthology, and I was slightly sad that we didn't get to celebrate the launch of it in person. So this is really a beautiful occasion to do that, and it's such a incredible room. I can't stop looking at the wallpaper. For people who are not in the room, it really is incredible. Absolutely. I just heard that it was handmade, so yeah, that's even better. But I'm going to read first my poem, Because, which is in this collection. The collection, for people who don't have the book, has been really thoughtfully separated into categories by theme, and there are headings which I wanted to read out because they're just so incredibly phrased. So the first is learning to bark, just sort of talking between different languages and between our own world and the more than human world. And the second one is what have you done with the world? The third one, and where my poem sits, is when we were not the center of the universe. The fourth one is no mythical land. And then the final section is a different Eden. And each of them sort of brings together poets and poems who are speaking across these themes from different cultures, from different backgrounds and different stages in time. And I think that's what makes this book so powerful, is that it is that conversation between those different cultures. So this poem is a conversation as well, but it's sort of a pre-verbal conversation. Most of the poems that I write are about intimacy. They're looking at what happens when you condense the space between yourself and the other, between reader and writer, between you and I. And I find that many times language gets in the way of communication. Words sort of words are a little bit like a magic trick, you know, they'll be like, hey, look over here, and they sort of dazzle you with what they do. But what's really happening is happening somewhere else. And so for this poem, I really wanted to look at how we talk about things that we have no words for. And the way that I find easiest to do that is to look at how animals communicate, because often they don't speak in a language that we tend to understand. So this poem looks at that. It looks at vulnerability, it looks at intimacy, and it looks at how we can condense the space between what we see as ourselves and what we see as others. Because nothing is like anything else. An approximation will always break down when you need it most. Because nothing is as soft as a horse's muzzle at the curve above quiet punctuations of hair, thin, pointed teeth, guarding tenderness. Because I had just been that morning at my college graduation, looking gorgeous in that dress, where the speaker urged, I hope you will be vulnerable with each other, that you will be open to giving and receiving vulnerability. Because he touched me without asking, saying you are like nothing I have ever seen before. Like how I am touching this horse, feeling it's like nothing else before. Us, two silken manes, two hurt mouths. I am so gentle with you between my hands, but tell me, strike my face, pull away. Do you not want me to? Blow slow into the open black tunnel of flared nostril, wet, dark, animal, breathing back. That's how they kiss. A passing stable hand spoke in my direction. And I believed him. I believed him. Not because it was true, but because I wanted to.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Nidhi, you see what I mean? Can you hear that metronomic balance she manages to get? It's something quite amazing. That pre-verbal you mentioned in communication reminds me of something Berger said when talking about, one of his late essays, talking about translation and saying it's so much more than language A to language B via dictionary. There's the howl beneath that original impulse of poem or text that can also be tuned into, maybe, if or at least it's worth trying and being aware that it's there. And I just reminded of that. And howl is also something Daniel Salgado translated as a translator. He has translated Ginsberg's Howl into Gallego, and also recently Lawrence Ferlinghetti's, a selection of Lawrence Ferlinghetti's writings from the early 60s, the epigrams. Yep. And so Daniel Salgado, a good friend of mine from Galicia, from Monterosso, has published 10 collections to date. His most recent, Birds and Other Poems, from which the Crows poem he's going to read is in here. A selection of Daniel's poetry has been translated to Spanish as Huelga General, General Strike, which will become obvious, I think, where that title comes from as we listen to Danny. His work is also included in several anthologies. As we said, he's translated Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti and co-authored journalistic political essays on the political left in Galicia. And so, Danny.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the Trinity Center for Literary Translation. When I came in, the first thing I thought was in William Morris and After and Crafts and the right to beauty of everybody. It's very beautiful, this room. And thank you to the Instituto Cervantes for the help. I'm sorry for my spoken English. I'm going to read a poem about crows from my last book, Birds and Other Poems. The birds of the book are common birds in my town, and the crow is one of my favorite birds. It's the bird of Ted Hughes and poet, obviously, but it's the bird of Eduardo Pondal too, a Galician poet from 19th century and the author of the Galician hymn,
National anthem.
National anthem.
National anthem
of Galicia. The poem says that corvos, corvos, sobre a tarde fría, en calquera dirección, atravesan a terra ocupada. Non seremos libres mentres haxa que padeza, din os debuxos da súa traxectoria. Golpes contra o aire, o brillo negro de todas as nosas derrotas. Pero que insinúan? A quen se supón que agoiran mal? Como deciden onde pousar? Por que coñecen a cidade por dentro e nada saben do seu proceso histórico? As preguntas deveñen vexetación miúda. Eles marcan unha nova rota de castorres que gardan o territorio.
Crows, crows. In the cold afternoon, from every direction, they cross the occupied land. We will never be free while anyone suffers, say the outlines of their flight. Beating against the air, the black brilliance of all our defeats. But what do they mean? For whom do they not bode well? How do they determine where to alight? Why do they know the city inside out, but nothing of its historical process? The questions yield little. The crows set a new course as far as the towers that guard the territory. Salgado. And what I would like to do now is, I'm always interested, and this is part of the impulse of this book, of the conversation engendered by putting poems and poets together, in bed together, as it were, in between the pages. And so I've asked Nidhi and Daniel, Nidhi first, to select two of the Galician poems, maybe tell us why she chose them and read them for us, so we can kind of keep the conversation going that way.
So it's firstly an honor for me to read these poems by these poets. The first one I've chosen is by Esteve Claus. It's called And Then It Is Then. This poem always stops me. The language is beautiful, it's very spare, and it takes sort of a long view of time. I translate from a language called Sanskrit, which is one of the oldest languages in the world and is no longer a spoken language. And in it, in one of the texts called the Rig Veda, there is a sort of sutra which is called the Nasadya Sutta. It's talking about the origins of the world and creation and how nobody knows where it came from. And at the end of this sutta, there's a really interesting sort of close to it where it says, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but it says, you know, where did this world come from? Where is it going? Nobody knows. Perhaps only the creator who's sitting somewhere in the sky might know. And then the last line is, perhaps even they don't know, you know. And it really reminded me, this poem really reminded me of that, because there is such a sense that we have, I think, of as humans, especially in this age where we sort of seem to know everything about everything, you know. We wander around like we know how to fix things and we know what's what, and something about this poem just sort of takes that apart in this really gentle, playful way. So this is and then, it is then. And then, when you know, and I know, that it all began long before we were born, with the first bewildered comet, or with the first crashing galaxies, or with the first whale of all the first whales, of the hundreds of firsts which existed first before the whales. Then, when you know, and I know, and the world knows, then that life comes first, then life comes first.
Have you another one you'd like to read first? From Galician, please, maybe.
So this is a poem called Lobo, Wolf, by Olga Novo. A couple of years ago, I was living in New Mexico. I was studying with some Native American shamans, and the way in which they sort of attend to disease or suffering is by animal medicine. So human beings sort of take on the characteristics of a spirit animal, and usually this animal will bring a medicine that is sort of particular to that person and that situation. And the wolf is a very powerful spirit animal across different Native American tribes. So this poem really spoke to me because there is the archetype of the wolf, and there's the archetype of sort of the girl encountering the wolf, and also the threat and the desire that brings. But it is very much in the vein of the more than human world. So it isn't kind of centered in the speaking I, and it's incredibly done. So I'm going to read it in English. Wolf. As a girl, when they asked me what I was afraid of, I always answered, giving birth and the wolf. I once saw the wolf. It was night. We were heading home across the mountain, and my father pointed him out, alone, as if lost, his instinct forgotten somewhere, his hunger abandoned to the past. He didn't even look at us, consumed in his own blood, his burden perhaps. The night pines witnessed the destruction of his species. I clearly remember his paws flitching the ice, the tense silence of evolution looking on that night, the raw indifference of owl, of granite of the dough rising, the fermenting molecules of flour. So used to extinction, they never even knew. Since then, my fear is a guiding howl at night for you and you and you. And though you can hear me now, though you can see me speak, my tongue placed perfectly by mother utterance, it's not me, this voice that growls, I tell you it's not me. This curling clamor of blood and vowels, the black pitch of spit I swallow. Cursed am I, and the tribe who showed me night as something that stood for God. And now I know for certain that the bowels of the last wolf encircle my tongue. And if one day the mountain crosses me on its way home, I'll point here inside where my voice is kept prisoner. And what will I say now when they ask me, what am I afraid of?
Beautifully read. Thank you so much. From Olga Novo, magnificent poet. And you'll be glad to hear that Galicia has a constant, give it a constant population of about 800-900 wolves. Galicia and Granada are the two areas on the peninsula where the wolf populations are quite healthy, and brown bears as well. And the law has just been passed in the Spanish Parliament to prohibit the hunting of wolves. So, thanks so much for it's gorgeous to hear. I mean, to hear poems in their own language, to hear them in translation, then hear another voice read those translations. It just it keeps on add to the echoing chambers, doesn't it? As reminds me of those caves down in Granada, and you can go down and further down and further down. And the echoes reverberate. So I think we've got time. Yeah, we're good for. Daniel has chosen 2 poems from the Irish side of the page, and he's going to read them for us now in the Galician translation, and I'll give you the originals. Danny?
I choose first one poem in Gaelic from Olga Novo.
Alvin Ní Ghríofa.
Yeah,
that's a tough call. It really is.
I was practicing yesterday, but it's impossible for me. First, when I read first this poem in Galician, I thought about cows, but it's not about cows.
No.
It's about a bird.
It's about a ladybird.
Yeah,
but it's God's cow.
Yeah.
Is one of the names in Irish.
Yeah. So I'm gonna talk about cows anyway, because cows are a very important animal in Galicia. It used to be 1 million of cows in Galicia.
Yeah.
In my little village, when I came from, there are more cows than people. It's true. But I chose a poem in Gaelic because I think that the biodiversity of language it's a very important thing. The preservation of the idioms. It's a very important thing for us who write in minorized languages. And this is a beautiful poem about a ladybird, not about a cow. A vaca de Deus. Pequena vaca de Deus, como en ruso. En holandés, Dievegerbestie. Animaliño do noso Deus. Segundo a tradición xudía, ela pertence a Moisés e non a Deus. Vaquiña de María en Alemanha, 7 lunares para as súas 7 ledicias, as súas 7 dores. Ela trae sorte ao pobo tanto en Turquía como en Italia. Todos procuramos cumpridos os nosos desexos pola vaca de Deus. Como consegue unha criatura tan pequena ter mar do peso dos nosos debezos e malia todo ser capaz de voar?
Ladybird. And of course, Manuel Rivas's first stories, his collection of stories was called A Million Cows.
Yeah.
And in Irish, we have Boher, which is a road literally is a cow side on, it's the width of a cow. And the Bohreen is and I think so, and from India, obviously. So we're all bovine cultures and still are. Take that as you like. Ladybird, God's little cow. As in the Russian, Kopech. In Dutch, lieve Hiestebieste, little animal of our God. She belongs to Moses and not to God, according to Jewish tradition. Little cow of Mary in Germany, 7 spots for her 7 joys, her 7 sorrows. She brings luck to people in Turkey and in Italy. We all seek to have our wishes fulfilled by the little cow of God. How does such a creature so tiny heft the weight of our wishes and still be able to fly? And I might ask Michael, would you leave on the whole page 97? I'll ask Michael, who is far better Irish than I do, to read the original Bowen J.
Okay.
Very much.
Bowen J. Vertas Sarushish on the coffee. Lieve his basic, synonymous, Alvin or OMalley. Islamish Agasli Logia E. Rare Nudach. Bowen with a Sigadman, Shak Spotter, da Shak Wulhard, da Shak Minon. Harayim Shianta, Rinis Turk, is Nagar. Lorgmoit Galeir Minta RG is our mile on moin J. Conas impien Nyak Kobita, Ulach, our Bulla, August Fos, Ecopoetry, Ethics.
Michael, thank you so much. Oh God, now I wish Tommy and Festa. Now we're at the celebration with the languages echoing off this great wallpaper. I think we've landed. We've landed. We're here. Danny, you've chosen another poem. Excellent. Yes, excellent.
I chose a poem from Mary OMalley. That is, its title is Area of Scientific Interest, Área de Interesse Científico. I'm not sure about what is ecopoetry. It's a difficult term for me, but I'm sure that any ecology that not include the people, the humankind, is not of my interest. This poem is about this, I think. Área de interese científico. Na miña primeira visita tras o solsticio, demorada por unha boa tormenta, a muller da casa de pedra falou: "Voume erguer e beber o amencer, incluso esta luz grisalla do día, que non é asollada nin fermosa, senón atoada como a un trapo case esfolado nunha cibro, unha bolsa plástica na porta do final esgotado do remate do século. Erguereime e comerei nas nubes negras que se pegan ao meu bandullo, porque son misericordiosas e agochan os sanguinolentos colares de Kosovo, os avións de guerra sobre Bagdad, as caras frías dos funcionarios de subsidios en Dublín, elas contendo que ven coa marea sen saber que é o naufraxio e o refugallo o que mantén a poboación da costa. Pero dígoche, afirmou, teñen vidas miserentas como non biches en deixamais. 4 patacos. Levantouse e tomou uns grolos de mal tempo e vestiuse con nubes luídas, magníficas o seu xeito. Despois almorzamos, serviu o té en cuncas elegantes. Sempre me gustou a porcelana. O lume roxou na rella e comemos o amencer desagradable e non nos fixo mal. Faríamos boas raíñas, afirmou. Ou luciríamos máis alá do que hai ali. Miramos máis aló das ondas, o longo mar. Fixo un arco elegante co brazo, arrastrando cúmulos. Esta é unha área de interese científico, segundo Bruxelas. Tiveches ocasión de tratar cun burócrata? Preguntoume como se eu recibise sen decatarme a algún na miña casa, cos seus pezuños agochados en zapatos de charón, expeditos na arte da sorpresa. A meirande parte deles levan unha vasoira polo cu. Non lles importaría moito verme aferrada a un barril 10 millas máis aló de Slinehead que ardan no inferno. Bebemos o noso té barris. A caridade pode estar ben para aqueles que están deitados baixo edredós nas mañás xeadas, pero non para mulleres que viven en casas de pedra, as rentes do mar.
I think it's Danny. Great poem to finish on, at least this part of the evening. And for those with the translation hats on, there's 2 phrases in this that caused a challenge to Isaac Shubin. Isaac Shubin, by the way, is the translator of all the Irish poems, both from the English and the Gaelic into Gallego. Isaac lives in Sheffield at the moment. He was resident in Cork for about 5 years and learned Irish while he was down there. And the 2 phrases you're going to hear, the first was subsidy checkers, which there was a whole cultural conversation around Ireland during the EU and subsidies as a result. But the other one was talking golf sticks. You'll hear it in a moment. And that led to great hilarity. And he did a marvelously inventive job of translating talking golf sticks. This is Mary OMalley's area of scientific interest. And before we hand over to questions from yourselves or from those online, thanks again, really everybody, both Nidhi and Danny, for coming along tonight and reading their poems and other people's poems, and for our hosts and our collaborators, Cervantes and Trinity College, and also to everybody out there and within here in the wallpaper. Area of scientific interest. On my first visit after the solstice, delayed by a good storm, the woman in the house spoke. I will rise and drink the morning, even this grey daylight that is neither sunny nor beautiful, but stuck like a half-torn rag on a holly bush, a plastic bag in a doorway at the fag end of the century. She greeted me. I will rise and eat the black clouds that stick in my craw, because they are merciful and hide the bloody necklaces of Kosovo, plains over Baghdad, the cold faces of the subsidy checkers of Dublin, stemming what comes in on the tide, not knowing that flotsam and jetsam is what keeps coastal people going. But I tell you, she said, they have lives of pure misery. Such misery as you never saw, halfpence and pence. She got up and took in gulps of bad weather and dressed herself in tattered clouds, magnificent in her own way. Then we breakfasted. She poured tea into elegant cups. I always liked fine china. And the fire reddened in the grate, and we ate the bad morning, and it did us no harm. We'd make great queens, she remarked. We're a damn sight better than what's there. We looked out over the waves, the big sea. She made an elegant arc of her arm, trailing cumuli. That is an area of scientific interest, according to Brussels. Did you ever meet a bureaucrat? She asked, as if I might have unwillingly entertained one in my home. His pointy hooves in hidden patent leather shoes, they being practiced in the art of surprise. Talking golf sticks, most of them. They wouldn't care if I was 10 miles out past Sline Head, clinging to a barrel, so damn their souls to hell. We drank our Barry's tea. Charity may be well for those that lie on under the covers on cold mornings, but not for women in stone houses at the edge of the sea. Mary OMalley, magnificent. So if anyone has any queries, questions, comments, either, I don't know if there's anything coming in through the Ethernet, otherwise we can continue to read poems, or if anyone has anything to say, any questions for Danny while he's here, or Nidhi while she's here. Thank you very much.
I suppose it's a question really for all three of you, because all three of you translate, and one of the contributors to this collection is Doireann Ní Ghríofa.
Yes.
And she's out a wonderful book, A Ghost in the Throat,
Yes.
where she talks about the difficulties of translating the great poem Queipo into English. And so there's a kind of a notion of translation that it's a kind of haunting. You're haunted by something. And I wonder, in your different experiences of translating from English, Gallego, Spanish, Sanskrit, do you ever feel haunted by the choices, not that you make, but the ones you didn't make? I mean, you feel that, every page is kind of clouded with the ghosts of the words or expressions or references that just didn't make the cut.
Who would like to go first?
Well,
Okay, yeah, I'll start. It's a great question, by the way. I noticed when I visited the Heaney exhibition, it's currently on the Bank of Ireland, the great and Danny was there yesterday. It was great to see his drafts and see the words he scratched out. And a couple of things happened. You realize, oh my God, how one word can just make the whole puzzle click together. But also, and I believe, practice at least both as a poet and a translator, you choose a word or a phrase or an image, it ignites the next one. And even though you may rub that previously out, its vibration is still there in the following image, word, phrase, sound, rhythm that set it off. And that's why, you know, you'll see it with Muldoon quite a lot, and Kieran Carson, and myself, people who play with dictionaries. And you'll see words and etymologies suggesting other words and etymologies. I mean, since Lydia's mentioned Sanskrit, I've got the word honey in my mind. I can't get it out because I think we can trace it back to Sanskrit. And even though it's not a spoken language, in fact, it still is. The ghosts of Sanskrit and Latin and Greek and all these are here. So yes, there is a torment of what you didn't go for. And it tends, the torment more than the ghosting or the haunting tends to be when you didn't take the risk that you wanted to take and maybe were talked back down a little bit or talked yourself back down to a more conservative position. And they're the hauntings really that were there.
It's a difficult question for me. I think that translation is an endless job. I can read my own translations from Xavier or Ferlinghetti because I want to do it again and again and again. And I have my books
constantly noted, annotated.
I don't like my whole version now. I do in other way, totally different. It's maldición.
It's a curse.
A curse, more than haunted. Yeah, for me.
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. But it's translation for me. It's a way of reading more than other thing. Of reading very close to a text, and this is the interest for me.
Okay. So it's you know, it's a never-ending howl. It's a howl that goes on into the night, as it were, both triumphant, or in your case, perhaps, out of a sense of pain.
But I'm an intruder in translation world. I'm not professional. I not study translation. I only, but I like poetry.
You could almost say, you know, we had the cuckoo here at the beginning. You know, translation could be considered. I mean, we're all constantly looking for metaphors, and it's not needful, but is it a way an intruder, just as we are intruders on the mountain, by the seashore, and the river, and the language, etc., etc.
I love that intruder into translation. Like, I feel like an intruder into poetry many times because I don't actually study it. But I think for me, a lot of things that I translate would be they would be from extremely old texts, sort of like religious scriptures almost. And they maintain a very distinct kind of meter and syllabic count. And so the choice that I have to make is usually quite, it's quite restrained by those parameters if you want to be faithful to the original and not sort of have a rendition of it, but actually have a translation. The choice of words is very, it's not as wide as it could be. That said, I've always been really kind of mystified by synonyms in language, like the fact that there are so many ways to talk about one thing when you could easily just have one word to refer to one thing, you know. So I've always kind of been a bit like, what is the use of synonyms other than sort of decorating language in a way, you know, which is quite interesting to me because as a translator, you draw a lot on synonyms as a poet as well. You draw a lot on synonyms to say something that hasn't been said in kind of a kind of pedestrian way before. Sometimes I think about how I came to language because I think it has informed how I look at a word on a page. So I grew up in the Middle East. I was kind of born to Indian parents, but they moved to the Middle East soon after I was born, and I was put in an English language school. So I didn't actually speak Arabic. And when I wandered around in the city, I would see signs and they would say something and I would have no idea what they were saying. But I sort of made up in my head the meanings of these words. And sometimes they would come quite close to, you would have some context for what was around, but sometimes they would just be completely my imaginings. But what it did, I think, was create a kind of congruence between the visual representation of a word and then the meaning of a word, which I don't think I would have come to if I was simply taught a language in school, because it's so defined for you when you're kind of taught a language and you're given a dictionary and you're like, this means this, as opposed to all the possibilities that open up when you look at a word in Irish, for example, when I look at signs on bus stops and things, and I have no idea what they say, but then you start to see certain resonances with maybe other languages, or even the formation of text on a page. So that for me is maybe not so much about haunting, but definitely a sort of cool deception sometimes as well. It's a sort of trickery that happens around it, and I enjoy that process of kind of because I think all words have a little shadow attached to them as well, and it's usually what you bring to a word. So when Keith says a word, it means something to me, but it might not be what it means to him, and that kind of dance is always present, even in general conversations. So yeah.
And isn't it what's so interesting about literature, but poetry, for my arena at least, written in a language where the writer's it's not their first language they're writing in, and I think that's what we're going to get now in Ireland. It's happening. It hasn't become visible yet, but it's going to, and I think that's going to radically change what we think of poetry, what it can become, how people deal with language. I mean, it's silly to think about it. Beckett did it, so and so many have done it before that. But I think we're on the crest of a new engagement with the language that comes from exactly that place you're talking about. But hopefully they'll keep the synonyms. At last count, there were 70 words for rain in Gallego, which are magnificently descriptive. Rain that comes from the north, rain that creates puddles, big fat rain, all it goes on and on endlessly, which is difficult when you're translating a rainy poet who likes the weather, but it kind of stretches your vocabulary. But yeah, great question, Michael. So I think we'll wrap it up there. That was a wonderful evening. We could, as usual, which is always a good thing, keep on going and going and going. I could at least, and that's always a good place to stop. There are books available for sale tonight. They're €12 at the event. Otherwise, you can, for those of you online, you can find it at deadlesspress.ie.com. And also we are heading to Cork tonight, the Cork World Book Festival, again with Cervantes, where we'll be launching with my co-editors Lorna Shaughnessy and Martin Vega on Friday night. And we hope to have Daniel back in Ireland soon, and maybe Lily over in Galicia also soon. And I think we've got time before the train, probably to grab a drink in Kennedy's, have tea or any other tasty, refreshing beverage, or... We actually have a glass of wine downstairs, and you can all come and join us. Excellent. Oh, wonderful. Ole. Yeah. Excellent. So again, thank you all very much. It's gorgeous. Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Okay. Oh, well done. Thanks. Good to see you. Cheers. Yes. Yeah. Could you come in a bit, Daniel? That'd be even better. There we go. Please do. That'd be great. Thanks, Ethna. Yes. Michael, will you join us? Shall we stand up? We'll stand up, and then that way, Michael can join us. Excuse me. No, come on in.
I know covert or restrictions committee, if you can get close to each other.
What's your?
I'm attached to the.
Yeah, lovely. Oh, that's really nice. Thank you. You can all look at my camera. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Dee. That was really was a gorgeous evening. Really,
Thank you all.
thank you. Mike, that was wonderful.